Now, a story caught my attention during the week. It came from the Office for Students, saying that tens of thousands of students in England are studying for degrees at institutions that simply are not up to scratch, nor are many of the courses that they're following. Failure to sort that out could see the institutions being punished for low quality and poor value for money. The chief executive of the OFS, Nicola Dandridge, called it a landmark moment in efforts to tackle poor quality provision in English higher education. Now, it's a consultation, but it reminded me of the former Labour Party bigwig, Charles Clarke, and the defence that he offered me when we were discussing student fees way back when. He said, it'll turn students into customers, and if they don't get value for money, they'll demand that money back, and the institutions will suffer. Goodness me. I'm delighted to be joined now by Lord Ralph Lucas. He's the editor-in-chief of the Good Schools Guide, education commentator, and takes the Tory whip in the House of Lords. Ralph, great to see you. At last, some might say. It's clear enough on targets, tests and sanctions. Is it a complex document? Is it one that we can all dig into?
I think it's a long document because it's got to deal with the complexities of the way universities run. But goodness, am I glad to see it. I mean, I'm an unashamed partisan for parents and students. And at last, they're getting an intermediary in the Office for Students that is really interested in making things better for them. They've at last done something about student suicides. And now they're tackling quality of courses. The bar they're setting is not high. They're saying that courses have to retain 80% of the students they take on. In other words, that at least that number will complete the course and think that they've got something worthwhile and that they will go on to decent jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an enormous investment students are making.
Absolutely, which is why I mentioned Charles Clarke's point all those years ago when I was Deputy President of the NUS saying, oh, you mustn't charge student fees, it should be free at the point of delivery and all the rest of it. And that was Clarke's key point, was students as customers. But are you happy that they tag on this measure as well of whether or not a student gets a decent job having graduated or picked up their certificate or whatever it might be? Because some would argue that's not a university's job.
I am absolutely delighted they're doing that. I mean, suiting students for the world afterwards. For the amount of money and the years that students are spending at university, universities really ought to be sending students out ready to succeed in the world. I mean, not necessarily at the subject they studied at university. I mean, there's a limited demand for historians and classicists, but ready to take on the world, really understanding how people work, how the world works, how to make something of yourself after university. And a university that doesn't do that is really not doing well by its students.
How do you think the universities will react to it? Because generally speaking, they've been fairly quiet in response to this as I trawl through and Google it up, because some universities are notoriously arrogant, will just shrug their shoulders and say, oh, that's just the Office of Students. We've done it this way at Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, wherever for years, and we shall jolly well carry on doing it. Do you think it is a wake-up call?
I don't think in the current environment that the top-level universities have anything to worry about from this. Most of them are doing most of what's necessary anyway. And frankly, there's a sort of presumption that Oxbridge graduates are worth employing, which is probably down to their inherent qualities as much as to the quality of the education they get at the universities. So I don't think the arrogant ones will suffer. And indeed, most of ordinary UK universities won't suffer. It's not, but the ones that will be really challenged by this are the ones who are just offering courses and then not doing all that it takes to keep students on them. The ones who are not really describing what the course is about and what it takes to succeed on it. And are luring students in without giving them a chance to say, no, that's not really for me.
Sure. I'm glad to hear you say that, and I note the distinction I think you're implying, which takes me to my next question, which is some of the, shall we call it, more technical courses and more technically driven universities. Indeed, some of them used to be polytechnics before they became universities. Courses like hairdressing and media studies often get a thorough kicking, and in my opinion, quite often undeservedly, because the world of work is changing, and you said that universities should be getting kids ready for jobs, ready to succeed. I think we need to have an equality of judgment as well between the classicists and the metal bashers.
I'm a great fan of practical courses. I think a lot of students are suited to them, and hairdressing can take you anywhere in the world. It's a wonderful passport to a life of exploration when you're young. It's something which I'm never going to trust a robot to do. Though I see you can get hair cutting machines that you attach to your vacuum cleaner. I think there will be a real understanding that personal practical skills are the core to human experience over the next 100 years, and that the more numerical things like accountancy and lawyering are actually going to be the ones that are replaced by computers.
Yeah, well, that's good. I agree with you as well. Little though I have, I wouldn't want a robot doing it. I have a very, very fine gentleman who does it for me. Final question. I mentioned in the introduction, Rafe, that you're active in the House of Lords. You take the Tory whip. Two questions. One is, do the government have to embrace this from the office, or does it happen because they've already empowered them? And will you nudge the Department for Education and indeed the Minister for Universities to keep a weather eye on it?
Yes, and I'm really impressed by the support they've given to the Office for Students. I was a bit dubious when it was created, but it's really shown how good it can be in this and in other things. And it's navigated dealing with a lot of powerful and opinionated universities and not wavering from supporting students. And the things they're saying in this document about making sure that students from disadvantaged backgrounds have the same chance as everyone else, and that it's the university's responsibility to make that happen. I mean, I'm really delighted to see that.
Good to talk to you, Rafe. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. Lord Ralph Lucas there, education commentator, editor-in-chief of the Good Schools Guide, and as he just answered, as I said, Conservative peer taking the whip in the House of Lords. I'm now delighted to be joined by another famous nudger, and that's the chair of the Education Select Committee, Robert Halfon, who sees a problem in the education world and doesn't just witter on about it, actually gets down there and does something about it. I hope the team have told you, Robert, I want to talk about universities, but I also want to talk about illiteracy in schools, which I know you've done a huge amount of work on. First of all, as far as the Office of Students is concerned, do you welcome the consultation, or would you wish they'd just get on with it?
Well, of course, I welcome the consultation, but we do have a big problem with many of our universities. I mean, universities have to be, obviously, they're about education and the experience of students. I had an incredible time at Exeter University when I went there, but they must be about building skills. We have a skills deficit in our country compared to many other countries across the world. They've got to be about social justice, ensuring that disadvantaged pupils and students have a chance to go to university. But above all, they must be about getting students jobs. And too many of our universities are doing courses where students are not getting graduate jobs at the end. And this is wrong, because students are paying £9,000 plus a year in order to get that education. And there are all kinds of statistics showing that something like 50% of graduates are not getting good graduate jobs when they leave university. So there has to be radical change. I don't mind the courses as long as people get good graduate jobs at the end, and as long as we meet our skills needs of our country.
And do you embrace the idea that, as I referred to Charles Clarke, who I know you know very well, although he's from the other side of the political divide, that notion of students as customers? You know, if you pay all of that money and you don't get what you want, you should be entitled to go in there, kick butt and get your money back.
Absolutely. And too many universities during COVID have not given students a proper service. I've had messages from students, and they are not getting the required tuition that they need. They should be getting their money back. But what I'd like to see the government do is to have a target where at least 50% of students were doing degree apprenticeships. It's a win-win, because if you do a degree apprenticeship, you still have a university experience, but you earn while you learn, so you don't take any debt. You get the skills that you need and the country needs, but you also get a good skilled job at the end, because we know that 90% of apprentices who complete, they get jobs. So the target of the government shouldn't be about university. It should be about skills.
Yeah.
And I went back to my old university only a few weeks ago to make a speech where to degree apprenticeship graduates. This was at Exeter University. It was an incredible thing to see. Hundreds of students getting degree apprenticeships, all being given jobs by the companies that they were doing their apprenticeships. And that should be the model. Of course, some students would like to do academic work, and that should continue. But I'd also like to see every single course at university involve significant amounts of work experience. So, for example, if you wanted to do English literature, you might want to work at a museum or a publisher. And I don't mean just going off for a year and doing it. It should be part of the week of that student's activities, because we need to. The world is changing. We were just talking about robots a moment ago and hairdressers. They say 28% of jobs could be lost for young people by 2030 because of artificial intelligence and automation. The world is changing. We need to really look at our university courses, what university is for, and adapt to the changing world.
Robert, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I promised I wanted to ask you, because I'm genuinely staggered when I read the piece in the Sunday Times suggesting a staggering growth in the number of children going to secondary school from primary unable to read and write properly. 200,000 of them last year, the department admitted. Sunday Times says it is now growing and getting out of hand.
It's pretty shocking. Part of this has been caused by COVID and the schools closing, which is why I argued from day one that it was a big mistake to close schools for most pupils, and why I've campaigned day and night to keep the schools open and get our children back to school. There's another article in the Sunday Times looking at what's gone on in America, and it shows that remote learning is actually a disaster, particularly for disadvantaged pupils in the United States. And the same thing has happened here. So what I'd like to see is every student should be assessed for how much lost learning there is, their literacy skills, their numeracy skills. And then if that is done by the government with the schools and local authorities, we can actually know the extent of the problem and adapt the catch-up programme and the tuition programme accordingly.
Well, talking about the catch-up programme, the quote at the end, which you will have seen because you've read the article, I know, in the Sunday Times, from the Department of Education on the literacy aspect is, and I quote, "An ambitious recovery plan is being rolled out. It isn't adequate and it isn't being rolled out quickly enough." What are you going to do about it as chair of the Select Committee?
Well, I keep arguing that what the Prime Minister needs to do is set out a long-term plan for education with a secure funding settlement. He's done it for the NHS. The Defence Department has a long-term strategic review of billions of pounds. Why can't the same happen for education? And it doesn't need to happen in the spring. It needs to happen now, and it's got to be led by the Prime Minister. In our committee, we are doing an inquiry into the catch-up programme. Now, I'm very supportive of that, but what I worry about is the statistics suggest that it's not reaching the most disadvantaged pupils, and it's also, there are huge regional disparities. So Southwest, there's a lot of it going on. In the Northeast, there's very little of catch-up programme going on by comparison. So the government really need to act. They've rightly spent £5 billion of taxpayers' money on this. We've got to make sure that £5 billion is spent properly. And that's why we're doing the inquiry into the catch-up. And that affects everything, including the literacy, building up literacy.
My final brief observation to you, Robert, is that if they don't do that ASAP, then our first conversation about how children get into university and go on to get jobs and what have you for over 200,000 kids is not going to be an issue, and that's outrageous.
There's nothing more important than education, because it gives everyone that chance to climb the ladder of opportunity. And I do respect what Nadeem Zahawi is doing. I think he's got a grip with the education department that we haven't seen for some time, but there needs to be urgent action. It's got to be led by the Prime Minister, because anything if the Prime Minister says it, the whole of Whitehall follows. And we need that long-term plan for education with the secure funding settlement, and we need to sort out the catch-up programme sooner rather than later to make sure that it reverses the damage that has happened to pupils during the lockdown.
Robert, always a pleasure to talk to you on both universities and on primary and secondary education. Thanks very much indeed for your time.